Right. Hello, everyone. So, as said, cognitive systems engineer. I work at Mile 2, which is a government contractor. So, hence the reason why we're going to be talking about the DoD slightly today. But don't worry, it's going to be more general and focused on staged world studies. So, staged world is a particular type of technique that is really powerful for representing the complexity of your domain. It allows for really quick iterations with, as I said, minimal setup. I'll get into more details about what that exactly entails. But I want to be able to bounce back and forth between this general sense of what is a staged world and a specific case of it that we ran at my company, which we called our Resilience Engineering Simulation, or OREOS for short. So today I'll be talking about real-world complexity, which all of you are very much familiar with. I'll define what staged worlds are as a method and go into an example case, and then talk about, in a general sense, the benefits of how we actually use this method. So it should come as no surprise to anyone here that the real world is complex. We have vast amounts of different challenges that we face every single day, working with a variety of different customers. And we have to be able to tackle this complexity. We have to be able to understand and be able to prepare for unexpected challenges that may arise. And better yet, to understand how our teams react and respond to them. So as an example, in my world, I work with the DoD, the Department of Defense. It involves a lot of different acronyms, organizations, groups, and this is only a small sample of what that entails, all of which I have personally worked on. So if you have any questions about this, I can answer them in somewhat fashion. But it's more than just alphabet soup. The complexity is represented even just in the language of this domain, acronyms and everything else that it entails. And this is what we have to try to represent in our stage world to better prepare our teams and understand how they respond to it. So building complexity into stage world involves many different aspects. We have a variety of distributed users with, of course, conflicting needs. Goal conflicts are inherent. They have to be reliable systems. They have to work under difficult constraints. And of course, in this community in particular, we focus on being resilient to a host of unanticipated challenges. Now, talking about something more specific, so in the OREOS project, we study teams deploying to a remote cloud service, which shouldn't be unfamiliar to this crowd. The cloud service allowed no direct access to deployments, very limited observability, so basically you're sending it off and hoping for the best. There were many different distributed teams that were involved in this. Not just our teams, but the platform teams. We had many other groups, of course, the users and the customers, and all of them having to work together across diverse roles. And as with any sort of complex system, we have conflicting goals between each of these services to try and maintain what we want to be able to maintain, as well as work with the platform team to make sure that their services are working as well. So since Dave brought up yesterday, of course, pattern-based inquiry, we start with the patterns. We think about and embed these patterns in the real world. So incident response breakdown, or another way to put it is common ground breakdown, is critical in this world. I already mentioned lack of observability. We have limited or asymmetric data access. Of course, model updating, effects at a distance, and multiple simultaneous effects. Mind you, this is not cheating on your homework for Dave. You still have to come up with new patterns, but here's at least a few to kind of whet the appetite. So thinking about these patterns specifically in our world, we saw these opaque systems. We saw them created separately by distributed parties trying to work them together. We have highly sensitive information, of course, and critical services that need to be running and highly available for our customers. And maybe not unique to the DoD space, but certainly a big priority is the multiple adversarial attacks that we face every day from cybersecurity threats. We have to maintain these services, and it's very tough to be able to maintain them when you're constantly under attack. So the reason why I talk about all these different patterns and problems is that we have a sampling problem. We cannot be able to represent the entire space of the world, right? A model that includes every relevant detail is the world itself. So we have to be able to simplify and focus on the critical elements that are important. So that's why we need these general types of problems and patterns to anchor the challenges that we present to our people, to be able to understand and apply their experiences. So that's why we talk about now getting into stage worlds. The basis of a stage world is having these patterns embedded in real cases, taking the general of the patterns into the specific of the real world itself. And that's really powerful to be able to bounce back and forth between general and abstract, and specific and real, being able to bounce back and forth between all of these elements. So the specific method of a stage world is an exercise that's designed to elicit expertise. The main goal of a stage world, as opposed to other types of methods like game days, chaos experiments, all valid methods, but they're often used mostly in training, mostly in understanding. Stage worlds are very powerful for understanding and exploring how your teams actually discover, how they respond to the problem. It's more about the learning aspect of how your teams actually work. And I'll set up a spectrum here. A stage world is in between a natural observations, so going out and actually watching your people in the field, taking notes, and on the other end, Spartan lab studies. So think if you were ever volunteering for psychology where you sat down for $20 an hour and having to click a button for reaction times. Those types of isolated experiments in the lab. Well, stage world is in between that. We try to set up the conditions for observation by creating these scripted scenarios that have these broad patterns embedded in them. And the process itself takes that general pattern, mapping it to realistic situations, shaping the scenario, and collecting data. And one of the powerful things is not just to be able to analyze it within a particular team, but doing it across teams, being able to see how multiple teams react in different ways and comparing and contrasting that. So this all sounds very academic and everything, so I thought, let's take it to an example that many of us may be familiar with, especially if we had gone to Derek's talk yesterday. D&D. So Dungeons and Dragons is a very similar case for stage worlds, because as the dungeon master, you have to be able to set up and respond to your participants, your players, and be able to set the stage for surprise. So hopefully people are familiar with it, even if you've just seen Stranger Things as an example, but it's really powerful as a dungeon master to be able to give your players flexibility. You have to be able to anchor enough specificity into the world for people to be able to immerse themselves in it, but not enough that they get lost in the details. It's really critical to be able to give players open leeway, open pass, so they're not just reading a linear novel. That's the hallmark of a good DM, being able to balance out specificity and flexibility. We were able to do this with our teams, and we ran it through with 3 different teams, and of course, infographics and all that. The main point I'm trying to share is that we distributed the roles between them and made sure to have diverse perspectives, between having DevOps engineers, software devs, quality assurance engineers, project managers, even a system administrator. This is fairly representative of our teams that we work with day to day. However, we did something a little different. Most of the people that we worked with were not actually on the same projects together. Some of them they obviously had familiarity with each other. We're a small enough company that people knew of each other, but we wanted to break down some of those silos of specific projects, only people working with the same individuals, because it was helpful to break down preconceptions and past history. So people can come in more with fresh perspective into these challenges that we would present to them. So let's get into an example of one of those challenges. So this is an example of a problematic release. All right, we got a first person here. OK, Platform 1, which, mind you, is the opaque cloud service that I mentioned before. So platform 1, here is XYZ version 1. Please deploy it. It's all ready to go. Platform 1 says, OK, got it, will do. And they kick off a multi-stage deployment process that usually takes several hours. However, in the back room, people were starting to talk and realized, whoa, 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 there's a minor possibility that XYZ version 1 could lose some valuable data, but it's a minor possibility. Well, OK, it's probably not deploying yet. It's probably fine. We'll just tell them to stop it. It's perfectly fine. Oh, well, platform 1 comes in and says, hey, surprise, it's all deployed now. So fast, am I right? Well, actually, we found something that could be bad. Can you just roll that back, really quick? Platform 1 says, well, actually, we can't. We have to freeze all of our deployments right now because we found a security issue on our side. So I have to wait. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So this is the prompt that we gave our teams. What do you do in this situation? Well, let's go behind the scenes, talk a little bit more why we decided to shape it in this particular way. So the first step is setting up who is a part of this. We kept it very vague, intentionally, because once you start getting specific, people bring in their specific cases, their specific experiences right to the forefront, and it can be rather convoluted then. Let's say I had named one person Dave. Well, I know several Daves, and it's very hard not to think about all of them if I hear someone named Dave. That brings the wrong type of experiences to the table for the start of the scenario. The next step, we talked about, OK, here's the problem. We only gave a small little bit of information about it. There's a small possibility of losing data. Well, as the facilitating team, we were able to build out a lot more detail behind the scenes to prepare for any questions that the teams were going to give. Because we have to be ready and prepared as the team to be able to respond. And of course, we're not going to have all the answers. As I said before, the world is infinitely detailed. So we do not want to have every detail planned out ahead of time, and we really can't. So we have to be able to plan out enough to be able to make the world rich for them to be able to relate to their experiences to, without being too specific. The next one is thinking about complications, these patterns that we build in. How can we make this world more rich, this challenge more difficult? Well, we can think about adding in other types of patterns. Some maybe working at cross purposes, maybe adding in multiple simultaneous effects that are happening, or effects at a distance. Throwing in the fact that, oh, you can't roll back the deployment, which would probably have been your first case of response, makes it much harder for the teams to figure out what to do next. Because the real world is a constantly moving background. There's no such thing as a nice and easy case where one thing happens, then another, oh, we got to wait until that's done before the next challenge phase comes up. We want to make sure that at least a couple of things were happening to be able to challenge the teams and really push their boundaries of what they would do and what possibilities they would consider. So once you've set up the stage, even with this really low fidelity, very simplistic prompt, you just have to be prepared to be surprised. You have to be prepared as the facilitators to be able to respond. And mind you, it was not just one of us. So I might have been the main person working with the team directly, but we had a whole team in the background. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Richard, and many others that were behind the scenes watching and be able to help respond to whatever the teams were actually coming up with. And that's the beauty of being surprised by them, being able to give them that flexibility to go wherever they wanted. So some of the lessons that we learned from this, it was really fascinating in the very first iteration that the most knowledgeable person, the person that was the DevOps engineer who worked with Platform 1 day to day, actually became rather fixated pretty quickly. We had too much details in our first iteration that they just narrowed down in. It's like they knew Platform 1 front and back. And that actually stopped them from seeing other possibilities that were beyond their scope of experience. So we were able to do very fast iterations and be able to change up and update the prompt as we went in between the scenarios. We had 3 actually in total. I only just showed 1. But we were able to change up the order, some of the formats, some of the details very quickly because it's a very low fidelity prompt. Didn't take very much to change it up, especially to customize it depending on the audience that we wanted to be able to show it to. The other method that we used, the elicitation by critique, was very powerful. So it's a method where we showed them even a rudimentary graph of, say, network traffic, if they asked for it. It wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't terribly detailed, but just having something to react to is a very powerful method. Gets people right in the state of mind to be able to interrogate it, to be able to see what's there and what's not there, is being very important. We also found that the non-technical experts, the project managers in the room, actually asked some of the best broadening questions. They were the ones who, well, maybe 10 minutes in, were like, has anyone checked if the customer's been impacted? Basic things like that you'd think in a organized incident management response you probably should do, but they were able to kind of take themselves back from some of the technical weeds that some of our experts were really getting into and think, okay, bigger picture, what's going on outside of just our team right here? And then at the very end, we actually did a debrief with each of the teams. So we went through, kind of talked about, as I said, the facilitation team was watching the wings and they were taking notes, they were figuring out what was important, what was going on, and we were able to talk with them and really reflect back on the experience. Talk about what challenges they saw, how we saw the teams were actually responding, and what did they think about it. Because at the end of the day, the stage world was meant as a learning opportunity. So it was really about understanding how our teams responded to these challenges. So I want to throw in one thing that I think will give a little more of a picture of how this actually went about, because as I said, we had a back room of facilitators that were helping, including one individual. So these are some of the prompts that we were able to keep moving things forward to be able to challenge our teams with. So to wrap up, the reason why we're talking about stage roles is that it's a powerful method that should, I think, be in a lot of people's toolboxes. It's another way to look at the world, to uncover challenges that face our teams that honestly would be very difficult to replicate in full, or at least it could be very costly if you tend to break the entire system. So the prompts themselves are very quick to iterate, they're low technical cost, and they take not very long to be able to put together. However, it does take a fair amount of knowledge, especially in cognitive patterns and the complexities of the world, to be able to build them up in the right way. So that's why I said minimal cost at the beginning. We really want to enable these diverse teams to envision a variety of solutions. It's not just at the sharp end practitioners, but also blunt end folks as well. The managers, the executives. We would like to be able to put them into these situations as well, run them through, see how they react, or better yet, give them the opportunity to see how their people react to it as well. Sharp end and blunt end together, working on these challenges. And of course, with stage roles, it's really about this balance between specificity and flexibility to get the most out of discovery. Give your people enough leeway to be able to explore, to be able to react, but enough details that they feel invested, they feel immersed in the challenges that we bring forward. So hopefully this is at least another thing to add to your toolbox. Amongst all the other types of simulations, studies, experiments, other types of methods that you use to really understand how your teams work, to challenge them, to give them something to think about, and to learn how we can better respond in the future. So if this would actually work, thank you very much. Ask questions. Oh, there you go.